Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Welcome, Mr. Farage.
Thank you.
Our first question, we'll go straight to it, is from Daniel Green this evening.
Mr. Farage, the majority of the UK's top economists and business leaders believe that leaving the EU has a significant risk of economic decline and potentially even a recession. I don't see what I, as a member of the public, stand to gain from this outcast.
Well, it's a funny thing, that's what got me into politics in the first place. 25 years ago, we had a government backed up by the TUC, backed up by all the so-called expert economists who said, and by the way, Mr. Cameron, who at the time actually worked in the Treasury, and they took us into something called the exchange rate mechanism, where they pegged the level of sterling against the Deutschmark. I, at the time, was working in the commodities business, but also was trading currencies. I thought the whole thing was stone bonkers. Within 2 years, all the experts had been proved wrong. We had record business bankruptcies and record house repossessions. Then 10 years went by, and the euro came along. And 15 years ago, the very same people were all saying to us, but if you don't join the euro, then I'm afraid foreign and direct investment into Britain will cease, the City of London will close, terrible things will happen to you. Well, all I can say is thank God we didn't join the euro. And now this same gang, who it seems to me have been wrong about everything, through this process of groupthink, and because in many cases, although they masquerade as being independent, they're actually being paid by the government or paid by the taxpayer, are telling us terrible things would happen to us outside of the European Union. Can I just say this one thing to you? That they've been wrong before and they're wrong again. There are strong, independent voices in business. You know, people like John Longworth from the British Chambers of Commerce, who resigned his position to speak out against this, and people like Digby Jones, the former Director General of the CBI. So the trend is, if they're currently in post, they support the status quo. Once they've retired or resigned, the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, then they speak more freely. I would just say this to you, trade is not made by governments, trade is not made by bureaucrats, Daniel, it's made by people like you. You buy products. You choose to buy a product or you don't. And do you know what? Once we've divorced ourselves amicably from political union, we will then go on buying cars and wine and trading happily.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Daniel, for that question. We're going to stay with questions on the economy and go to a gentleman not far away. Aaron Barsley has a question for Mr. Farage.
Hello. I work in the pharmaceutical industry with multinationals who are worth billions to our economy. They're here because we're in the EU. Do you think our independence is going to risk thousands of jobs and billions of annual income to our economy?
Well, I don't buy the fact that a pharmaceutical company is in Britain because we're in the EU. They're in Britain because they want to be in Britain.
I'm going to interrupt you there.
And there are lots of reasons for doing that.
Some operations can only be done in the EU. I can't do my job in Switzerland, so I can't review some EU products and live in Switzerland. You have to be in the EU, and that's why they have EU headquarters in the UK, which makes it worth 32.4 billion a year.
I have to say that I'm not wholly happy with the way that much of the pharmaceutical industry has behaved. In particular, I see their lobbying in Brussels, which is absolutely massive, and I see the way they've been very good at putting out of business people producing alternative medicines. So not everything your industry has done has been good.
Proved against placebo.
But look, I've heard these arguments about car manufacturers. I've heard these arguments about car manufacturers. I hear all these arguments that people are only here because we're in the EU. Well, do you know what? We have in this country actually rather a big domestic market. And just to give you a sense of perspective, right? Only 12% of the entire British economy, 12% is exports to the European Union. The other 88%.
Is specifically about pharmaceuticals, sorry.
And also about jobs too.
32.4 billion 2004 report from the government, right? So get that round your head, 32.4 billion. Now, the European Medicines Agency is in London. It's all the medicines, all the groundbreaking ones for the whole of Europe are reviewed in London, and Brussels listens to us. You can't do that if you're not part of Europe. Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is entirely and utterly false.
Full stop.
Whether you're based in London, you know, I mean, for example, our biggest industry isn't pharmaceuticals. Our biggest industry by a mile is, of course, financial services of all kinds. You know, from stocks and shares to pensions to hedge funds, you name it. It's our biggest industry. It brings our biggest revenues, and all of that has been transferred to agencies that are scattered around the rest of Europe.
We've had plenty on Mr. Vazi's question. Thank you very much. We're going to stay with these issues, though, and go to Heather Reeves, who has another question for Ms. Farage. Heather.
Mr. Farage,
Hello.
if we leave, we may find ourselves punished or financially crippled to set examples for other EU countries that wish to leave the EU. What safeguards are in place to protect us, especially when negotiations don't go our way?
OK, fine. What did we join 40 years ago? What did my mum and dad's generation vote for 40 years ago? Tariff-free access to the European market. 40 years on, what we find is that tariffs across the world have come down because of globalisation. And for the benefit of tariff-free access to a market that sells us more than we sell them, that regulates not just the 12% of the economy that sells to the EU, but the other 88% as well, gives us unlimited free movement of people and bans us making our own trade deals with the rest of the world, frankly, the cost of membership now far outweighs any benefit. And do you know something? If those renegotiations went badly, let's say the worst case scenario, that the French and Germans decide to cut off their nose to spite their face with their... Hang on. Right, well, let's just say they decide to cut off their nose to spite their face with their biggest export market in the world. Do you know what? If they put tariffs on us, those tariffs will be significantly lower than our net financial contribution. So no deal is better than the rotten deal that we've got at the moment.
Heather,
and the reality, the reality, of course,
Allow her
is...
to come back on that,
yeah,
please,
sure.
Ms. Farage.
The President of the EU Commission, Jean-Paul Juncker, has already said that deserters will not be welcomed with
I know,
open
isn't
arms.
he lovely?
And that the UK...
Isn't it wonderful? I mean,
And that the UK will have to accept being regarded as a third country and will not be handled with kid gloves.
I don't want to be
The German
threatened.
Chancellor and the Prime Ministers of Spain and
I'm sorry,
Netherlands
we're
disagree.
British, we're better than that. We're not going to be bullied by anybody, least of all the unelected, charming though he may be, Jean-Claude Juncker. Forget it.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to go to another question now. Stephen Dennison-Smith has a question for Mr. Farage.
Yeah, Mr. Farage, you've maintained that wages are kept low by uncontrolled immigration in the UK, and that if we leave the EU, one of the benefits will be that wages will rise.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be so that increased wages will make us less competitive globally, and that isn't it far better that we allow wages to rise because we have a stronger economy and in Europe, rather than artificially restrict the supply of labour and boost labour rates that way?
Well, what we've done is we've artificially given our labour market a situation since 2004-05 where there's been a dramatic oversupply. That has driven down the cost of labour. That's just simple market forces, and indeed even the Bank of England, you know, have backed up the fact that for people on average salaries, their living standards are 10% lower than they were in 2008.
Yeah, if I can come back to you on that, what I'd say to you is that just artificially jacking this, the cost environment in the UK up by restricting labour supply,
well,
the problem you've got is that you've seen traditional industries move to other parts of the world to lower cost manufacturing environments. And simply, if you make us more expensive to do business artificially, it's going to migrate
now,
elsewhere.
this is the argument of Lord Rose, who, of course, is the chairman of the Britain Stronger in Europe group, although appears to have gone into hibernation. And this may well be because when he appeared before the Treasury Select Committee, he was asked if Britain leaves the European Union, has a work permit system for foreign workers, wouldn't wages go up? He said yes, but I don't think that would be a good thing. Do you know something? There is more to this country. There is more about our community than just being competitive.
Artificially putting ourselves into an environment where we just make us...
I'm sorry, sir. What is artificial is to have opened up our doors to nearly 500 million people and to flood our labour market and to see some of the best,
but when
finest...
you or I are old and
you can come
dribbling in
stand
our
here if you
nursing
like.
home and needing somebody to mop up behind us, if you double the cost of that kind of work, what are you going to do?
I don't know.
Well,
Well, we're not saying double the cost, but we're saying significantly higher. And what I am saying to you is, I think it is wrong that for average, decent families in this country, their living standards have fallen by 10% over the course of the last few years. And it's about time, as a society, we started thinking not just about GDP figures, not just about the rich getting richer, but about ordinary, decent Britons who've had a rotten time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the question too. We are going to now stay with immigration and go to Tola Jayolo, who has a question.
Nigel Farage, what I would like to know is how can you have the audacity to use such blatant scaremongering tactics for the Leave campaign? In light of the recent horrific sexual assaults in Germany, you have basically suggested that a vote to remain is a vote for British women to be subdued to the same horrific assaults.
Well, just calm down there a little bit,
I
all right?
asked it perfectly
Because
calmly.
no. But I mean, you know, sometimes in life, what it says at the top of a newspaper page and what you've actually said can be slightly different things. Look, I'm used to being demonised because I've taken on the
Aren't you
establishment.
demonising my
And I
case?
have just let me finish. And I have, you know, when I first suggested we should have an Australian-style points system, I mean, you'd think I'd said something dreadful. And now I'm pleased to say lots of people are saying it.
I don't think that's
what
what
I
I
said.
asked.
What I said about Cologne was that it's a huge issue in Germany. It's a huge issue in Sweden. I think Angela Merkel has made a big mistake by saying, please anyone come. And what's happened is a very large number of young single males have settled in Germany and in Sweden who come from cultures where attitudes towards women are different. I haven't scaremongered in any way at all.
Are you not embarrassed that Justin Welby today said that you're legitimising racism?
Well, I'm sorry, and I'm not going to stand here and attack the Archbishop of Canterbury, but I think he would have done better to have read actually what I said and not what the headline was. And he would do well to see what the head of the Roman Catholic Church in Germany has said, because he's made some very robust comments
But
indeed.
you're targeting a certain group of people and using them as bait to prey upon British people's rational fears about mass migration.
I'm sorry, this is an issue for the future. It is a tiddly little issue as far as I'm concerned in this election campaign. But I knew that at some point in this campaign, the Remainers would come for me and would try and conflate something I'd said out of all proportion.
May I just
I do
ask-
believe in border controls. I do believe we need to have a sensible, balanced migration policy, and I do believe Germany have made a bad mistake.
We're going to stay on this issue and go to Emril Morgan alongside Tola there, and a question also for Mr Farage.
Hi, Nigel. I know a lot of people, I have an access to a predominantly black British audience, and a lot of the concerns that they have raised, alongside concerns that I have myself, is that you are going to increase the fear and discrimination of black British people through your anti-immigration rhetoric.
Well, I think
are you encouraging racism in Britain?
I don't think you could be more wrong, and here's why.
Well, how are you going to safeguard that is essentially what I want to know.
And here's why. You know, I take a very strongly pro-Commonwealth view. I think it was very bad and wrong of us to turn our backs on the Commonwealth in favour of a European political project, and we've made a bad mistake. So now what we do is, if you've got a qualification and you come from India or you come from parts of Africa, you now find it very, very difficult to get into this country despite the historical, strong...
You're still anti-immigration, so I don't
I'm sorry, I won't have that.
You are anti-immigration.
No,
you use scaremongering and inflammatory comments in your campaign that have gone against people that look non-white. How are non-white British people going to stop facing discrimination about their identity and nationality in this country? That is what I really want to know.
I'm sorry.
Because you haven't addressed my concerns.
Well, I tell you what, you know, if you want to think that, and you don't want me...
I don't think that. That's the majority of people that look black British or non-white.
Well, lots of them...
those concerns. They're very real
can I tell you...
and you're dismissing them.
Can I tell you that lots of them voted for my party in the last election,
Did they?
stand for us as candidates...
Did they? Can I see the evidence? On what numbers?
And you're not listening, are you?
How much of the 3% voted for UKIP?
I can't do a lot unless I'm allowed to talk.
She's put a very clear question to you.
Now, look, I'm explaining to you that I take a view that is strongly pro-Commonwealth. If we have an Australian-style point system rather than an open door to 508 million people, then actually it'll be better for black people coming into Britain who currently find it very difficult because we have this open door. And I would also say this to you, that once again, this attempt to demonise the Leave campaign or me, actually, there is big support for this amongst the ethnic minorities in this country who know that actually our current open border policy is damaging all of our communities. And here's our chance, maybe our one and only chance as a nation to get a grip on this issue.
Imriel, thank you very much indeed for your question. And we're now going to go to John Nightingale.
Mr Farage, a number of high-profile studies have clearly shown that EU migrants contribute far more to the British economy than they take out. So how can you constantly ignore these findings and continue to tell us that immigration is a disaster for the UK?
Well, we see reports that say that EU migrants pay more tax than they take out. I saw a report yesterday that suggested that actually it's a marginal loss for the country. I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll meet you in the middle. We'll agree with the House of Lords, who looked at this and said, in economic terms, it's probably about neutral, all right? But my argument is this. Mr Cameron, who will come on afterwards, will tell you that it's a wonderful economic benefit. And despite his pledge in the general election of reducing immigration to tens of thousands a year, he now says it would be disastrous for our economy. The real truth is that the population of this country is rising at a number where we need to value people's quality of life and standard of living and not just national GDP figures. If immigration continues at the current rate, our population will be 80 million by 2040. And just to cope with that, do you know we need to build a new house every 4 minutes, night and day, just to cope with the current numbers. So what I'm saying to you is, let's have a balanced approach.
Let me tell you that we, as you well know, have an ageing population here, that we are going to need migrants to pay our pensions, to pay for hospitals, to pay for the NHS, although all that is going to be necessary. That if you think you can actually stop people coming in here, if you persuade our country to leave the European Union, and then you find, in fact, every European country that wants to trade in the free market has to have free movement of people, what are you going to do in 2 years' time? And then are you going to ask to join again?
You're bringing something else in here. Look, nowhere else in the world, apart from the EU, is the argument made that to trade with each other, you need to have free movement of people. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
But it does in the EU, and we live in Europe.
The Americans sell more into the European Union market than we do. They are not members of the European Union, they don't have a trade deal with the European Union, and they most certainly don't have free movement of people.
Every European country that is not in the EU but wants to trade with the EU has to have free movement.
Well, it doesn't have to have free movement, and actually the Swiss have just voted against it, as you well know.
John Nightingale, thank you very much indeed for that. We're going to move on because we want to cover some more topics. I'm going to turn now to Dominic Rath, who has a question on law and order and security.
According to the Director of Europol, law enforcement in the UK gains increasing security benefits from our EU membership. Given this and the fact a number of former police chiefs have stated it would have a negative impact, wouldn't it be a huge backward step for our security to leave the EU? How are you going to assure our safety isn't compromised if we leave?
Well, and again, it's the same debate, isn't it? Some people say that it's much better to be with the European Union, and they tend to be the people who are currently employed.
Well,
and
then you say former
and then you
chiefs.
and then you get Sir Richard Dearlove, the former boss of MI6, who says actually it's a very dangerous place for us to be. Look, I take this very simple view. You quoted Europol at me. That same boss of Europol said that the migrant policy, and by the way, these are not refugees, they're mostly economic migrant policy over the last year, sparked by Angela Merkel, as we discussed earlier, has led to up to 5,000 jihadis coming in to the European Union in the space of the last 15 months. The former boss of Interpol said, we may as well put a sign on the southern beaches of Europe saying, terrorists welcome. So we have a very real problem. Now, the question is, how do we deal with issues like this? The first point that I think is really, really important is this. This should be a British passport. It says European Union on it, all right? I think, to make this country safer, we need to get back British passports so that we can check anybody else coming in to this country.
Can we allow Mr. Ruff back in?
I really do.
I completely agree on your border control point, but what I'm talking about with our security is not just about that. And you've got to put terrorism aside. Terrorism accounts for some tiny proportion of the cases that our police are involved with around Europe. You've got stuff like Europol, you've got Eurojust, the European warrant, you've got the convention which allows the databases to be set up to change. If we leave, all of them are going to be taken out under the European. There's also, I work in card fraud. You have the SEPA arrangement where card fraud losses are much lower under that than in outside SEPA, which is the single European payment area. There are all these reasons that aren't actually terrorist or immigrant related. So when you're talking security, I think our police have a lot more involvement, and we're also the leading people in Europe that have caused a huge number of changes.
But here's the point,
Dominic's got a lot to get off his...
I know he has. I know he has.
Can we be very brief, because I need to move on.
I'll be very brief. OK, there are two approaches to this. One is that as a sovereign nation, we cooperate and we exchange information with our friends and neighbours, just as we do with the Americans. But no one says we have to become the 51st state of America to do this. I suggest we do this as a sovereign nation, not give away the authority to this to Brussels or any
and we should
agency.
say also the Director of Europol is in favour of remaining.
Yes, he is, but he's equally criticised.
Thank you.
And
their own
we've
policy.
already got a lot of intelligence areas, sorry to come in, but we've already got a lot of intelligence to do with terrorism outside. The ones within the European Union aren't in that vein, and I don't think you can class them in the same way, sorry.
Thank you very much,
Here all
Dominic.
night.
OK, we're going to speak now and hear from Joanna Stambridge, who has a question about sovereignty. Joanna.
Hi. Even if we left the EU, we're still going to be members of a whole lot of international organisations.
I hope so.
World Trade Organisation, the UN, the IMF, all sorts of different organisations, all of which involve sovereignty trade-off to some extent. So would leaving the EU really establish UK sovereignty, or is it a bit of an emotional red herring?
OK. You mentioned the World Trade Organization. We have no vote on the World Trade Organization. When international trade's being discussed, Britain, and sometimes we're asked even to leave the room, because we've given away the ability to do that to an unelected bureaucrat based in Brussels.
Can I just stop you there? Because I'm not sure who's unelected. That's something that I keep hearing.
The European Commissioners are unelected, they are appointed, and they have the sole right to propose legislation within the European Union.
Can I again stop, because my understanding is the European Commissioners are appointed by elected representatives and have to be appointed
we cannot vote.
by
Mr.
the
Juncker,
Parliament.
Mr. Juncker was the charming Mr. Juncker, who's been threatening us, was mentioned earlier. We can't vote for him. We can't remove him. Sovereignty.
Thank you very much.
We live in an interdependent world. But the point about this referendum, this is a referendum for us to vote to get our independence as a nation.
Thank you.
And that means we make our own laws in our own parliaments. Our own courts are the ultimate arbiters, and we can then trade and make our own decisions.
We just want to get one more question in, please. Forgive me for interrupting there. Mr. Grimwood, Dave Grimwood, you have a question.
Thank you. We've been told that this referendum is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I'm interested to know what you think the EU will look like in 20 years' time if we stay in it.
Well, I think it's done for, frankly. I think the Eurozone is a catastrophe. Just look at what they've done to Greece and those Mediterranean countries. The migrant crisis is now not just dividing countries, but dividing within countries, leading to a whole new brand of politics. The money's run out, and yet, at the same time, they're saving up for the day after our referendum, their announcements about a European army and about an increased European budget. The project doesn't work. I want us to get back our independence, but to say we'll be good Europeans. We'll trade with Europe, cooperate with Europe, but govern ourselves. And I believe when we do that, the rest of Europe will do that too. And a happy Europe will be a democratic Europe of sovereign states who are good neighbours in the same street. That's where I want to get us to.
Thank you very much indeed.